Hello, I'm Carol Talbot, the creator and founder of the Possibility Hub, taking you beyond the boundaries of who you believe yourself to be and opening to new possibilities. This podcast is an advocate for awakening, encouragement, and creating opportunities for an expansion of awareness and consciousness to allow you to step into a fuller focus of who you really are. In this episode, I'm in conversation with Matthew Runn, who's based in Taos, New Mexico in the US. And Matthew is a developer of a very unique energetic healing modality called gamma wave healing. And today we'll be exploring just how it came about, because it's quite an extraordinary and out of this world story. Matthew uses gamma wave healing to facilitate energetic clearings and activations of the holographic DNA for clients around the world, as well as facilitating workshops where you can also learn the foundational techniques of this particular modality. So welcome, Matthew. I'm very excited to have you here on the Possibility Hub. And now people know a little bit more about you. I'm going to dive straight in because, you know, at a young age, you were already psychic. You had your psychic abilities. You were communicating with animals. You'd had out-of-body experiences. You were lucid dreaming. You were way ahead of the crowd, even at a very young age. Yet there was something that happened to you, I believe it was April 2004, that was very, very unusual and probably rocked your world. What happened?
Yeah, well, thank you, Carol, for having me here on the podcast. I'm really honored to be able to share these experiences with everybody. Yes, as you said, when I was a child, though I didn't know it at the time, I did come in with what seems to be some pretty heightened gifts. Let's say, the ability to dream the future into reality. You know, that those were those lucid dreams that I was having a lot as a child that actually really, it kind of unnerved me after a little while, because I started realizing that I was experiencing things that I had dreamed about, and I would try to change the outcome, and I couldn't alter the outcome of those dreams. And and at 6-7 years old, I didn't understand what that was about. I didn't necessarily even understand like the communication with animals or things like that, the different experiences that I'd had with, either our dog in the family, or elk, like a herd of elk that I came across once when I was very young, when we were out in the mountains. And, those types of experiences, I didn't think anything really of it. It was just kind of normal, but, eventually I kind of shut those abilities down, because like the dreaming I'd mentioned, it kind of bothered me, and I guess I kind of rejected those gifts, didn't realize them as. And after a series of events when I was a young adult, or 19 specifically, there were some shifts that occurred that really began to realign me towards a spiritual seeking. And it was while I had already begun that path of, maybe like shamanism, let's say, like seeking after shamanism, that I moved to New Mexico. I moved to New Mexico in the United States in 2003 to a place called Taos, New Mexico. This is a very sacred place, a very ancient place where the Taos Pueblo people, the Tiwa people that have lived here, they, according to their oral tradition, they've been here since their emergence after out of the inner earth after the Great Flood, thousands of years ago. And so this was a very sacred place. And I came here definitely with a hope and a desire to expand myself and to grow these spiritual connections. And then, yes, as you mentioned, in 2004, on kind of just a random day at about 12 noon roughly, I was hiking up in the mountains behind our house. So I was in the national forest, nobody around me, miles away from civilization. And all of a sudden, while I was just kind of sitting down and resting, and had decided right in that moment to get up and head back home, And right in that moment, I looked up above me, and out of the partly cloudy, beautiful blue sky, dropped down a UFO. And although now I guess they call them UAPs, but back then we called them UFOs. And so, out of nowhere, basically, this craft portaled in. I don't have any idea how high it was when it portaled in, but as soon as I became aware of it, it was very rapidly descending, and the sound frequency was really incredible. So as I looked up, I heard the sound that went like and directly above me, like directly above my head, this craft had descended down to right above the level of the treetops. So maybe let's say 100 feet of altitude above me, and about 30 meters or something like that, directly above me, and hovering is this craft. And and by the time when the energy had kind of cycled down and it was that very low frequency, there were waves of energy that were coming off of this. It almost felt like being in like at the beach with like waves of water hitting you, and each one of those waves was in pulsation with that that very, very low frequency. And so as I'm looking up at this craft, the craft was shaped kind of like an almond. So it was kind of pointy on one end and like rounded, or like a blunt rounded back end of it. It was perfectly chrome silver, perfectly reflective, no apparent seams or junctions or anything like that in its surface. But it was also invisible or invisible-ish, with this like distortion field around it. So I could see it and simultaneously not see it. And it really kind of funny. I mean, the first immediate thought that came to my mind was, wow, that's a low frequency. And it was the lowest frequency I'd ever been exposed to in my life, outside of scuba diving when the humpback whales are vocalizing. So it was like that kind of a thing where the sound frequency was so low, it penetrated every cell in my body. And then my next thought was, holy cow, I'm going to get taken. And it wasn't like fear, it was more like surprise, like going, oh my gosh, this is actually happening to me right now. And immediately on the heels of that thought of I'm about to be taken, I had a very clear knowing that came in that said, wait, no, they're not taking me, they're talking to me. And so I'm looking up at this spacecraft, which, all of my life I had known that this ET situation was reality, that this was a very real thing that was being withheld from us. And even from the time I saw ET in the movie theater when I was probably 5 years old, that I knew that this was a very real situation. So like, it wasn't surprising to me, like world shattering, but
right.
you never expect to have a UFO drop down above you when you're out on a hike. And so it was an interesting moment. And so in that realization of, wait, no, they're not taking me, they're talking to me. I tried in kind of my, at that point, rudimentary way to tune in psychically. Like I wanted to try to understand what was being communicated. And I got nothing. Like whatever, I realized very quickly that whatever was being communicated was outside of the spectrum of my ability to understand. So I kind of shut up, didn't do anything, and I just stood there, like probably mouth ajar, looking up at the spacecraft. And so it hovered above me for somewhere between probably 20 and 30 seconds. And just as an aside, I did not, as far as I can tell, I did not experience any lost time. This was all my consciousness was totally present, and I was the most alive I'd ever been in my entire life. I mean, it was quite an experience. So yeah, it hovered above me for about maybe 20 to 30 seconds. And then the craft rotated its orientation. And I was in the bottom of a little kind of side canyon in a bigger canyon. So I'd gone hiking up into the side canyon in the mountains. And when it rotated, it kind of pointed its nose up the canyon and began moving away from me. So again, visually, it was just right above me that I could see it. And as soon as it moved, I lost sight of it. But I could tell its distance from like the Doppler effect, because as it was moving further away, it was kind of like an ambulance driving away from you, how the sound gets like the siren frequency gets longer and longer and a little bit less intense. So as it moved away from me, I tracked it, which must have covered about a mile or so. and was moving itself into higher elevation, and would have been crossing onto the Taos Pueblo land from where I was national forest land. And so at a certain point, then it disappeared. Like the sound of it completely turned off. I could no longer feel the waves of energy coming off of it. It was completely dead silent. And I stood there in a completely silent forest for probably 5 or 6 seconds. And then suddenly all the sounds of the forest came back. And I realized, oh my gosh, I was just standing in a completely silent forest, which nobody has ever stood in a completely silent forest before,
Yes.
When you, right? There's
So it's
the
like
birds and
the whole forest have been switched to off.
Exactly. It was really a weird feeling. But, when the birds and the squirrels and, everything came back within a few seconds, it kind of told me that, okay, this wasn't like an event that completely like shattered the calm of the forest. They basically, the forest just waited for this craft to leave, and then everything went back to normal, like nothing had happened. And
What about you, though? Did you go back to normal?
Well, no, I didn't. No. So that in that moment, I just started laughing, and I was like, what the heck just happened? That was crazy. And I thought, okay, well, I guess it's time to go home. Like there's nothing more that's going to happen that'll, exceed that. And so, like as I said, I'd always believed that this was a very real situation. So it didn't really spin out my mind very much in that kind of a way. But I knew that something had happened. And as time went on from that experience, life just kind of, it just happened really rapidly, like a normal living. And the experience kind of just faded into the background. And
so did you feel new abilities come in? Were your psychic abilities enhanced, or did it just feel, okay, that happened, now life moves on?
Exactly. So, at the time, I didn't make the types of connections consciously to what, let's say, like the product of that encounter ended up being for me. So, meaning that that was in 2004. And so over the next several years, life happens, and my then fiance, we ended up getting married, we had children, we owned a business, and we're like running a gallery over the next few years. But during that time, I began to become even more interested in energetic healing, more interested in shamanic activations, more interested in the wisdom of the East. Like I began a Qigong and Tai Chi practice. So many things were kind of coming into place that I didn't consciously put together until 2009. And
was that when you came across somebody who did regression therapy?
Yes, exactly. So up to that point, like I had even learned an energetic healing modality at a workshop, and I was putting that work into practice just for myself and for friends and family. But in 2009, I had the opportunity to connect with someone that's become a very close friend of mine named Stacy, and she is a very gifted regression therapist, among many other things. And so in 2009, we ended up going into a regression. It was probably my second or third regression that I'd ever had with her.
Did she know about this experience that you'd had? Had you told her?
I believe that I had mentioned it, but it never even sat in my mind as something that I would want to go in and look after. It was just like an awesome experience. And yet during the regression, she was guided by, her guides that assist her in facilitating the regressions. She was guided to go into that experience. And that's not what our agenda was on that day, so we kind of went onto the sidetrack that ended up being really life altering for me. And so she was told to go back into that experience. So under hypnosis, I went back into the experience and was able to re-experience that close encounter and to learn what really had happened. And so in this regression, what I was shown was that there were two beings on board this craft. And the craft, again, like I described, it was shaped like an almond, but it was really like kind of a small craft. It would be like, kind of personal use, type of situation.
Yeah, and I like the fact that you also clarified that it was an extraterrestrial craft rather than a man-made craft, from the difference of, there is a difference, if there's,
Yeah,
seams and, nuts and
a-
bolts, that it was man-made. So
absolutely.
you
Yeah,
clarified that, and I like that.
yeah. This, I mean, just to describe him, it's hard to quantify. I mean, it really would have to be something that you would have to have an experience of. But the amount of energy that was coming off of this craft, it far, far, far exceeds anything that our consensus reality would tell us is possible off of something that size, like something the size of bigger than an SUV. It was, I would best guess, maximum 30 feet long. So maybe the size of like a private airplane, but this was like a small craft. And that the energy coming off of it was just extraordinary. There was no doubt in my mind that this was, even within the knowledge of the black budget kind of secret space program things, this felt so far beyond, like a TR-3B or any of those
And
types of
particularly
things.
because you said when you looked at it, you could see it, and then you could also not see it. Like change the focus of your eyes, it's there, and then it's not there. So it really was,
Exactly.
the energy.
Yeah, exactly. I learned after the experience, I did come across the one piece that my mind like didn't really accept was the fact that I could see it and not see it. And I came across something on, on TV, the Discovery Channel or something, where a physicist from Stanford was being interviewed about what it would look like to see a UFO. And he said, it probably wouldn't look like anything. You probably wouldn't actually see anything because the anti-gravitational motors or engines devices that they use would bend light around the object, and that's exactly what I experienced. It was like as if light was being bent around the object, and it therefore made it invisible, but your eye, like, you could absolutely see it. It was like shimmering, right? And it was very advanced craft. So anyhow, in the regression, where we ended up learning was that the two beings that were on board this craft, that they were from the star system Alpha Centauri. So the Centaur stars, Alpha Centauri, Proxima Centauri, Beta Centauri, they are the closest stars to our star. They're a little over 4 light years away, so they're our closest neighbors. And we don't really hear very much about this group, like within channeling and people that are communicating with star beings. You almost never hear anything about Alpha Centauri. So I was like, wow, okay, they're from Alpha Centauri, and these were human beings that were extremely advanced. I'm told that they are high 6th density, so kind of in that the last vestiges of physical form before
Exactly.
consciousness moves on into non-physicality. And so they were human beings. They are, they are human beings, I should say. They were here on Earth approximately 50,000 years ago. They were concurrent with what we would call Lemuria and Atlantis, primarily the Lemurian civilization. And these beings were kind of like protectors, if you will, of the planet, and were living on Earth in what we now call Peru. And they built massive structures, massive pyramid structures that are still there, that we believe to be mountains that are covered with forest, but they're actually pyramids, much like what we see, like in
Machu
Bosnia, or
Picchu, and and
yeah, Machu
Bosnia.
Picchu, Indonesia, things like that. And so where the connection came in with me is that we learned that this was actually an appointment of sorts, that the primary being that was on board this craft is actually a past life incarnation of mine. From my current perspective, would be one of my past lives. But to these beings, there is no time for these beings. I mean,
Exactly.
they're multidimensional, and they had come forward in time in order to find me. Like they had, using the frequency signature of my DNA, they found me, in time. They came forward in time in a moment when I was completely alone, away from all other humanity, and they dropped in. And so in that knowing that they were communicating with me, what we learned was that they were bombarding me with a super high frequency sound, probably like what we would call like a Sazer. like they were using some type of technology, sound frequency technology, and they went right into my DNA and they made some changes in my DNA which activated certain things. And then they left. As soon as that activation was completed, they took off. And so what we learned in that regression was that those activations that occurred on that day, they began unfolding from 2004 up to that moment in 2009. And once we recovered that knowledge, the activation for me felt like it had actually come into a place of like synthesis and completion. And I definitely dove in then with my intentions being that, okay, I want to begin helping people. I want to begin doing this professionally. And very naturally, the course of the development then of this healing modality that I was, unbeknownst to me at the time, I was already developing my own modality. Eventually, it was kind of in a neat synchronistic confirmation. After 2009, when I established contact with this being that was on board the craft, she became my primary spiritual guide. And
Oh,
so,
wow. So I didn't know there was still a connection, because you gave the impression
yes.
that they came in, gave you that download and that energy, and cleaned up your DNA and activated certain levels, which, as we know, our DNA has been tampered with. And, what's termed junk DNA is, introns really its potential, and activating that
Exactly.
potential is beautiful. And I also think,
Yeah.
Matthew, that people often think when you have these amazing experiences that, you're instantly changed. Whereas if you're, being bombarded with those kind of sounds, and sound is far more pure than light, then there is a time delay in unpacking or unloading that information, which is what seems to happen with you from 2004, the experience. And then,
Mhm.
I mean, how wonderful to be able to go deeper into it in 2009 and then realize just what had happened, and what how powerful that was. And I know the
Yeah.
story doesn't end there either, because something also happened in 2012 when you were in Hawaii as well.
Yes, there. So that was the close encounter is definitely a seed moment for me, or like an origin moment for me within the kind of greater trajectory of my awakening, let's say. But there have been several other moments that really have contributed, and one that really contributed to the development of my modality, which is called gamma wave healing. That modality, as I came to the development of this, it's actually kind of an interesting thing, as I was going to mention, with this connection with the star being who, she sensed the regression, and I made that conscious connection. She has remained as my primary guide. Well, there was an experience that I had sometime, and it would have been a little bit after. It was after the regression for sure. I forget exactly when it was. But let's say within a year or two, I was fishing. I'm a fly fisherman, and while I was hiking into the river, I was in communication. I was dialoguing with my guide, and I asked her, "What do this energy work that I'm doing? What do I call this?" Because I felt like at some point I was going to be teaching, and she said, "Well, if you need a name, you can call it gamma wave healing." And I was like, "Okay, well, why gamma wave healing?" And she said, "Well, when you're doing the work, you go into a gamma wave brain state." And I was like, "Oh, okay, that's cool." And about 6 months after I got that information from her, I had an opportunity to get hooked up onto a brain state technology machine. And I facilitated a healing on myself. And while I was hooked up there, they were measuring my brain activity. And I was in a gamma state the entire time that I was working. So, that was kind of an interesting thing that seeded the development of the name, at least for my modality. But one of the things that really accelerated my actual techniques that I was employing was this experience that you mentioned in 2012. So in 2012, I was with my family visiting the Big Island of Hawaii, and we happened to coincide with this visit coinciding with the Venus transit, which happens roughly, I think it's 178 years or something like that, there's this cycle where the planet Venus moves directly in front of the solar disk of the sun. And you can see the planet move across like a black dot that moves in front of the sun. And the best place on Earth to view that event happened to be the big island of Hawaii, and specifically at the Mauna Kea Observatory. And so I went up to the observatory, was able to view the Venus transit, and the portal of information that was coming in was really astounding. And then coming down from that Venus transit, we were within a couple of days, we were going to be heading back over to the other side of the island, where I had a scuba dive that was scheduled, that I was going to do the manta ray night dive there. That's kind of world famous. And the night before we were heading back, I had this lucid dream. And in my lucid dream, I was met by dolphins. And the dolphins, very specifically, they told me, they said, okay, tomorrow you're driving over to the other side of the island. That night, tomorrow night when you go to bed, you need to wake up the following morning before sunrise, and you need to go and swim out into the ocean, and we're going to come find you. And, so my background is that I studied environmental science with a focus in marine biology. So I was like kind of a marine biologist and had studied tropical marine biology. And I know very clearly that in the waters around the Hawaiian Islands, there are tiger sharks. And they are active, in the mornings and at all times, kind of. But so that
you really
was
had to take a huge leap of trust, a leap of
it was a huge leap of trust, because I really, even though I'm not afraid of the water and I'm not afraid of sharks, I think sharks are incredible beings, but I did not want to swim out into the darkness, into the ocean where there are tiger sharks in the morning. And but I did. So I woke up super early. I grabbed my mask, fins, and snorkel, and went down to the beach, and got into the water. I basically was just checking in the whole time, going, where do I go? And they said, swim out to the buoys. It must have been the dolphins or like my higher guidance, but I was in communication with somebody. And I swam out, I don't know how far it was, maybe 100 yards offshore or something. And then there's this series of buoys, and it's like a swimming channel that all the local residents would swim, like they're swimmers. And this morning there was nobody. I was totally alone, and I kept on swimming. And I was starting to get nervous because I'd been in the water for 40 minutes or so. And I said, okay, where do I go? And they said, don't, go out over the sand flats, and just remember, you're going to hear us before you see us. And I was like, oh yeah, okay, because of the clicks and the whistles, their echolocation, the sound travels much further than I would be able to see them. And about 30 seconds or so, maybe a minute after I received that information, I heard the clicks and whistles, and I was so excited. I was like, oh my God, this is really happening. And out of the distance swam up a pod of dolphins, and they were spinner dolphins. Which, if you don't know spinner dolphins, they are the most fun of all the dolphins. They literally play. They jump out of the water and they spin their bodies, and they're just incredible. And they're not very large. They're not like big like a bottlenose dolphin. So they're kind of a smaller size, but really incredible. And so this pod of 11 dolphins swims up to me, and two of the dolphins, which I immediately knew to be like the kind of matriarch and patriarch of the pod, they split off and they swam up the shore, but then the other 9 dolphins basically began swimming in a circle around me. And so I'm sitting there with my my mask, fins, and snorkel, treading water at the surface, watching this pod of dolphins swim around me. And they were swimming counterclockwise around me the entire time, and they were with me for about 45 minutes. That's my best guess. It was about 45 minutes. The entire time that they were with me, they were in telepathic communication with me. And
this
one
time
of them,
you were able to catch it, because I know when you said you were doing your best with the UFO to do telepathy, but there was nothing there. Yes. It was just being.
Exactly. This was completely different. This was in this moment, the one female who was kind of like I would say age-wise, she was probably like an adolescent by our age, maybe like 18 years old or something like that. But she was an exceedingly advanced being. and was in telepathic communication with me in English, or I translated it in English in my mind, obviously. And as they were circling around me, she primarily began working on my energy field. So she would be communicating with me about something, and when she would come into my field of vision, again, swimming counterclockwise, so they would be behind me, and then come around my right, or she would, it was constant. There were 9 of them. So I was at all times in every direction. I was watching dolphins. And she would then bombard me with this very high frequency, like echolocation sound wave that would go into various parts of my body. And it was kind of an amazing experience, because at one point, after about like maybe, I don't know, it was maybe 10 minutes or so into the experience, all of the dolphins began making love. And they were, and it was all of them. I mean, it was like boys with girls, boys with boys, girls
Bit of an orgy.
It was, well, that's funny, because
Or a love fest.
It was like a love fest. Yeah. But it was really amazing, because in the moment, as I was watching these dolphins making love, I began feeling uncomfortable. Like I actually began feeling a bit like a voyeur, like wait a second, should I be watching this? And that obviously was like a frequency being emanated off of my field. And I turned and I looked, and it was 2 of the boy dolphins, and they were belly to belly. And as they were swimming by, like one of them, they both looked me right in the eye. And one of them says, "What are you so ashamed of?" And they swam around me, and I immediately realized, oh my God, what I'm feeling is shame. And that same pair of boy dolphins came back around me again. And the other dolphin says, "This is the most natural thing in the world." And I realized, I was like, oh my gosh, like, because I don't carry like shame around sexuality, not consciously. I definitely didn't at that time. But when they made their pass around, after he said, "This is the most natural thing in the world," the one female dolphin that was the primary one, she hit me with a beam of sound right in my second chakra. And I'd never experienced anything like that before. I mean, it was like I was vibrating from the inside of my body. And as the sound wave, as she made her pass around me, which lasted only a few seconds, this beam of sound wave from her echolocation, it basically vibrated and vibrated and vibrated that second chakra, and something released off of it. And I realized that what had released was a shame pattern that I had been unconsciously carrying my entire life.
And it isn't just you, Matthew.
Exactly.
I mean, that's a pattern that's indoctrinated into many people in societies. And
Exactly.
I'm sure with people you see, that's a sort of a very prevalent pattern.
Absolutely. And that's one of the, I mean, was a big learning for me, because that's, again, nothing that within, there's no like history of sexual abuse or anything like that in my life. Like there wasn't a frame of reference for me to be carrying consciously, to be like working with shame. And yet that when this energy released out of my field, it was like a bubble burst, and I started crying. It was such an emotional release to realize that they had helped me to heal something that I was completely unaware even existed in my field. And so, so that experience shifted into other types of clearing. I mean, she gave me 3 very specific activations in my third eye, which then came online. So this is like tying it back in together about how this changed and evolved the work that I was doing. My sight changed. It accelerated again to another level after this experience. And meaning that about like every 6 months or so after this experience, which was June of 2012, there were new activations that were coming online where I would be working with clients, because at this time I was already working full time as a healer. So I was working with clients, and these new abilities would come online that I could directly trace back to the experience with the dolphins. So, and that has continued, to this day, combined with, when I went to Peru and went to Ollantaytambo in the Sacred Valley, which is, I found out immediately before my journey there, I found out that Ollantaytambo is the as above, so below representation on Earth of the Centaur constellation. So it's literally built in, they call it the llama. in Peru, the ancient Peruvians, the Inca, they called this the Centaur constellation the Llama, and the left eye and the right eye of the Llama are Alpha and Beta Centauri, and they built Ollantaytambo as an on-the-ground representation. So when I went to Ollantaytambo, I very specifically found the left eye of the Llama, which is Alpha Centauri. And in the structure, the little temple structure that represented the left eye of the Llama, there was a blue stone embedded, that is not from the bedrock of that area. It was this big blue boulder, and carved into it, barely visible, were a pupil and an iris of an eyeball. And I was like, oh my God, this is the actual eye of the Llama. And when I began meditating on that stone, immediately there were 5 Alpha Centauri beings that came in that presented themselves to me holographically, and facilitated further activations, which I believe are still coming online to this day. And that was in 2015 or 2016, I believe, when I was in Peru. So it's just an amazing experience, the way that all of these energetic activations, how they can unfold and expand and continue to grow constantly.
I love the way they're coming together and the way they're connected. And I'm curious to know if you feel that the dolphins, as cetaceans, are connected with the Alpha Centauri guides and beings that you met. If all this was a pre-planned, they seem to happen very naturally, and then as a result of that, you find yourself in Peru, and it confirms, and it just all seems to come together, doesn't it?
Yes, that's a very good point. And I don't think, excuse me, I don't think that I've consciously connected those two experiences in that way. But in your asking, I absolutely would say now that yes, this was totally connected, almost orchestrated, if you will, by maybe the higher self, or by these groups of star beings that I have really been working with since that close encounter. As far as my knowledge goes, the cetaceans are specifically from the Sirius star constellation, or the Sirius star system, I should say. The dolphins and porpoises and orcas, they originate from Sirius A, and then the whales, who we would have as the great whales, they come from Sirius B. These beings are actually embodied star beings that are living on our world. Many years ago, millions of years ago, perhaps, these dolphins came from Sirius A. They astral projected their consciousness into this reality, which they were warned against by their elders, evidently, because of the density of this world and how all-encompassing that density can become to a higher vibrational being. And so they were trapped and ended up having to essentially be rescued out of this density. But now they remain here and are working to support us, which makes it easy to understand why we see these atrocities, like the killing of the dolphins in Taji, I guess, in Japan, or like the pilot whales in the Faroe Islands, and the whaling vessels killing the whales. They're attempting to remove those frequencies,
Yes.
from this world, right?
And
But
they are trapped, so are we, to a certain degree, trapped. And this brings me round to the work that you now do, and how all these beautiful experiences have led you to the work that you do with gamma wave healing. And I was also very interested in the fact that you said that you were tested, you were wired up, and that you go straight into gamma. And I'm wondering if you go straight into gamma, or if you have a procedure to get into that state, because most people, when you associate healing, we're looking at theta or delta,
Exactly.
and you're going to gamma straight away. Do you have a way to access that state? Or did you not recognize that was the state you were in until they were able to identify it when they hooked you up?
Yes, I mean, I once I had received the information from my primary guide that I was going into a gamma state, that was the first time that had occurred to me, that that's where I was operating. I actually had learned the modality that I had learned years prior was Theta Healing, and which is a fairly well-known modality. And so I was always operating under the assumption that I was operating in a theta state. which it was funny because my qigong instructor would always say to me, she'd be like, Matthew, no, you're not doing theta, you're doing something else, you're doing your own thing, you know. And I always just used to kind of dismiss it until I got that information. And you know, that frequency, it's an interesting thing, because what I've come to understand is that when I had the close encounter, the activation that I received, they made some wholesale changes for sure, but they also kind of plugged in, if you will, the abilities that I had that I was born with. And in that process, I didn't realize at the time, but I was given this activation along with a pathway to be able to repeat this activation, you know, to be able to share it. So when I very first began teaching, the first time I was invited to teach a workshop to a group of pretty advanced, like, spiritual practitioners up in Sweden, excuse me, in the development of the modality to be able to teach it, I remember asking my guides, I was like, how in the world am I going to teach what I do? You know, like how do I transfer this? And they said the first thing to do would be to lead them through a guided meditation that is going to activate the pathway. And I was given a very specific set of instructions of how to guide this meditation that will activate the same exact pathway that I utilize within people. Of course, assuming that everybody is going to have a different ability, different response, different experiences that aren't going to be exactly like mine, but that this pathway would work. And so I began to implement that then in my workshops as the first activation that we would teach. So there is the meditation takes about 30 to 40 minutes, depending on how fast I go through it. But it essentially consciously opens up the energetic pathway that when you move your energy on this pathway, which I call checking in, that checking in process will put you into a gamma state. Certain people may stay like in a theta state. They may not be able to raise their frequency into that gamma frequency. But even from a theta state, the techniques are still effective that I would teach. But I would say the majority of people, at least 3 out of 4 people that experience the workshops, are able to access that gamma state, which you can see when they're working through the rapid eye movement in their eyes, where like a theta state, you know, you'll see their eyes moving under their eyelids and it looks like they're dreaming. But when you go into a gamma state, the eyes are like almost twitching. They're very fast. And so that's one way, you know, I don't have like an EEG that I could hook people up to during the workshop. But that's I'd say 3 out of 4 people, that's a way to confirm, is that their eyes indicate that gamma frequency.
Maybe it's time to get some of those machines in, hook some people up during those sessions. And, you know, also because that gives people another, you know, visceral experience of like, whoa, this is something. So
Yes.
That's the first step when you are doing a gamma wave healing training program. And you also work one-on-one with people. Do you also activate those gamma wave frequencies within people? And then where else are you working? Are you working at the level of cleaning up the DNA and activating the potential DNA and introns there?
Yes, all of that. Typically the guided meditation, that specific activation, I usually only do during the workshops, but occasionally, you know, if people are interested, we can schedule private sessions to do that, because like I said, you know, it does take a little bit of time to move through the whole activation. However, every single session that I facilitate with people, there are energetic activations, numerous energetic activations that come through during the healing sessions. These healing sessions, they can vary greatly depending on what's going on with somebody, what they're experiencing, you know, why they wanted to reach out to me. But all of them will follow kind of a typical pattern where the initial session, the beginning of the session, will involve what I call a hitchhiker clearing. So with the very first thing that we do is I clear my own field, and then we check into your field and we facilitate an energetic clearing that will remove energetic hitchhikers or energetic parasites. It will clear infiltrations that have infiltrated your energy field, things like, you know, implants or other distortions, energetic connective cords that are inappropriately connected. So we do this comprehensive clearing just to kind of return their energy field to a baseline state then that we can work with. And then the second thing that we do immediately after that is to facilitate the activation of an energetic shield. So over time, in recent years, let's say about 3 or 4 years ago, my Alpha Centauri guide, she helped facilitate the reawakening of some code that was in my DNA. And this is, like you mentioned, that so-called junk DNA. Much of what is, or non-coding DNA, I think is the official term.
Yes.
But, most of that type of DNA is either going to relate to potentials that are awakening, or it may relate also to things that have been shut down within our DNA. What I've learned is that going back thousands of years ago, many thousands of years ago, to the time of the so-called Anunnaki, these first off-world visitors that came to the world, they facilitated a massive distortion within our DNA that began to close down that potential, right? And so this shielding technique comes from a piece of code in the DNA that used to be inherently part of our energetic expression, but it got turned off. Well, now what we do is we turn this back on. We kind of flip the switch, if you will, and the auric field will begin expressing itself as a kind of frequency filter or frequency shield. So we facilitate that for everybody in the beginning of a session. And then once that's completed, then I'm like, okay, this is now our baseline. Let's go check in. And as we are working with people, we can work on a whole range of energies and influences. Almost always we are going to be working within the holographic DNA, identifying distortions, identifying frequency markers, which are a type of implant on the DNA. We clear those codes, and you can basically, with the DNA functioning as a hologram, you can essentially upload new information directly into it, just like a software update on your cell phone. It will integrate, make immediate changes to the energy body. So that's one area. It would be like looking at the DNA. We also can work with things like trauma. We can work with past lives or other lifetimes. We can clear different distortions like vows that were taken when you were a monk in another lifetime, and therefore you've got a vow of celibacy, and you're like, why isn't my partner here yet? And all of these many different things. But in these times that we're in right now, though, wow, it's like so many things are rising to the surface right now. I talk about it like popping the top on a champagne bottle, and suddenly all these bubbles are there that we didn't see in the liquid before. So that's exactly what's happening, is all these things that need to be healed and cleared or integrated, they're bubbling up to the surface as the pressure of this cosmic wave, the pressure of this awakening is pushing all of these distortions out of our field. And so this modality that we work with is exceedingly effective at being able to identify and then help release those distortions for people so that they can return into a place of their sovereign divine birthright.
Which is who we should be, and activate our superhuman abilities that I totally believe in. So not only are you working privately with people, and the fabulous news here is that through the gamma wave healing training programs, you're also helping people to access gamma and heal up themselves and the distortions, but also for them to work with other people, so that we've got you've got people who really can go out into the world and now do what you're doing as well.
Exactly. I've been fortunate enough to have opportunities to teach workshops all around the world, in the United States, in Canada, in Scandinavia, and in South Africa. And what we do at these workshops is, like I said, we run through that initial kind of gamma state activation, and then there are different techniques that I teach in each successive level of workshop. So in the initial workshop, the level 1 workshop, you would receive the primary activation, and then you would also receive several other activations, which are modalities that I employ during healing sessions. So, you would be able to do energetic body scans to scan the energy field, identify distortions, and then techniques of how to clear those distortions. There are channeled readings, working with guides, so you can communicate directly with guides. There are channeled readings working with cards, oracle cards, the tarot. There are multiple activations that come through in that level 1 workshop. People can definitely take those techniques and they can employ them in their life. You can employ them if you're already a healer. Many of the healers that I've worked with, they employ these techniques in their own practice. They are very practical. They're very effective. And then, like, as I said, at the successive levels of workshop, as you move through like the level 2 and level 3, these are more advanced techniques that it's good to have a foundational understanding first. And then when you get into advanced techniques like clearing hitchhikers, you're prepared then when you encounter these kinds of energies. And I've capped the workshop experience to date. It is a total of 4 workshops that are all kind of successive. And the people that have gone through that training, I mean, I've watched them over the years just increase their frequency, awaken their consciousness, heal themselves, and then be able to share it with their community, which is really, I'm really honored that those opportunities have come to me to be able to share this.
Which answered my question about what possibilities gamma wave healing opens up for other people, because as soon as people are raising their own consciousness and awareness, you cannot not impact other people around you just by your pure presence, but also
Absolutely.
giving them the ability to activate that in others. And literally, I'm sure that's the reason it's called a wave. It creates a wave effect. So
Absolutely.
What possibilities lie ahead for you, Matthew, with the work that you do and the way things are opening up?
Wow, that's a really good question, and it feels like there is a massive realm of possibility. And as everybody that I'm sure is listening to this podcast is aware, this moment that we are moving through it's a moment of literally unlimited possibility for us. Of course, we look at the collapsing of these control structures. We look at this, plandemic, scandemic, pandemic, whatever, that is moving around the world. And we understand that there are many things that look like distortions. There are many things that look very scary right now. But underneath all of that to me, it's like the Tower card in the Tarot, where the structure that is no longer serving humanity, it must be destroyed, and for people to be reborn and to have this new society and new consciousness birth. So we're in this realm of just incredible unlimited possibility. So it's really difficult for me to pin anything down. However, if we're kind of evaluating recent trajectories in recent years, I would say that I will continue facilitating the energetic work that I've been doing. I love to teach. I love to share with people. I love to help through those formats. So I'm sure that there will be continued teaching. One of the ways in which my work has expanded into the future is through working with sacred plant medicines, which I have some extensive experience with from many different traditions of shamanic, or other kind of plant medicine teachers. And that work has definitely expanded, where very dear friends of mine that are from South Africa that facilitate cleanses of people, taking people through dietary, physical detox cleanses in combination with utilizing my energetic healing, and as well, obviously utilizing these sacred plants to assist people. That's definitely a direction that I see my life expanding into. But at the same time, I also hold this other reality simultaneously, where the shift that is upon us, I believe, is going to radically alter our world, radically alter the consciousness of our world, especially when we factor in the increasing solar activity that is moving towards this prophesied solar event that is going to awaken all of humanity. And so when we look at this, I know that there's a very large role that I am here to play as an individual embodiment of this collective consciousness. And I'm very excited for whatever those unlimited possibilities are that may present a whole other thing for me that even in this moment maybe I don't see. But if I were to guess, I'm going to say that it's going to involve the star beings as these star beings continue to make their presence just so obviously known and felt, and the disclosure that is imminent, the first contact that is imminent, I figure will probably play some role in the future direction that I take.
Yes, I totally agree with you in this wonderful time of possibilities, unlimited possibilities, as we move further forward into the grand reset. And as you said to me earlier, you're definitely placed in a power center on this earth. So
Absolutely.
How do people get in contact with you, Matthew, and find out more about the wonderful work that you're doing, or if they want to book a session with Gamma Wave Healing? And I'm not sure if you're running any of the Gamma Wave Healing programs online at the moment. How does that work? So how do people get in contact with you?
Yes. So the best way for sure is via my website, which is gammawavehealing.com. So pretty self-explanatory. And Gamma, GAMMAWAVEHEALING.com. So gammawavehealing.com. And when you come onto the website, there's a little bit of information about me. There's information about the private healing sessions, which, as you mentioned, there is a link then that takes you directly into my calendar to be able to schedule a session either in person if you happen to be in New Mexico, or remote. Most of the work that I do is over video call, like Zoom or Viber, etc., Telegram. And so that's the easiest way in order to make contact around the healing sessions. As far as workshops and retreats, things like that, due to all of the strangeness over the last year, that has been mainly paused, until I think until we get to the end of this, which is coming very shortly. That just being mindful of knowing that a lot of people still aren't, feeling super comfortable traveling, or even if they're comfortable traveling, they don't like to travel because of the hassle that has descended into our world. But that anything related to workshops or retreats that'll be hosted in the near future, that would all be listed on the website. Admittedly, I've taken a bit of a break from over the last several months in updating the website, but this podcast and other exciting things will be being updated onto the website, including online teaching. That is something that I've had a very clear plan for, but I just haven't kind of gone through the steps yet in order to record all of those online sections that that I could then load. So that is definitely a plan for people to be able to attend basically a virtual workshop that would be spread over the course of 2 or 3 months, and then they would have ample opportunity to learn the techniques through watching videos and then practicing in group Zoom calls, etc. So that'll be one thing that is definitely coming on, as well as a collaboration with one of my friends, one of the medicine women in South Africa. We're going to be putting up a series of discussions and interviews and things like that. That'll also be listed as a resource on the website.
Fantastic. And I'll be putting the links below the podcast as well, so people can get in contact with you. And having experienced a private session with you, I highly recommend that people look at your calendar and book a session as soon as possible. Thank you for being so generous with your time, Matthew, and also sharing your extraordinary story, your extraordinary experiences. And I know we could probably carry on talking for a couple of hours, so I'm sure this conversation will go further. Thank you so much for joining the Possibility Hub. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Carol. I'm honored to be here and to share all of these amazing, grateful experiences with your audience.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode with my guest, Matthew Ryan. What a wonderful conversation. And as Matthew mentioned, you can find out more about booking sessions with him at his website, gammawavehealing.com. I'm thrilled to be sharing possibilities with you. And if you want more, then check out the link at thepossibilityhub.com. And if you feel that others can benefit from listening in, then please share, review, like, or follow on Instagram, Carol K. Talbot. And remember, you are always more than you think you are.